And welcome, Hoosier fans, to another victorious episode of the Assembly Call. We'll call this a victorious episode of the Assembly Call, as today your Indiana Hoosiers announced their new coach. And that announcement, that name, is Archie Miller, one of the names that has been talked about for actually for a while. When the Indiana job has come up, as potentially if Tom Crean was in trouble, who might be a guy to take the Indiana job? Archie Miller's name has always been one that's been talked about. He's been an up-and-comer, and now he is the new coach of the Indiana Hoosiers. And we're here to break it down, provide some instant reaction, literally instant reaction, because this just happened a few minutes ago. And Galen Clavio from Crimson Cast is here to join me and talk about it. I don't know if anybody else will be joining us. We'll see. But let's break this down. And Galen, let me just start with you and get your instant reaction on the hire.
Instant reaction is a huge thumbs up. Certainly I think with Fred Glass's initial statement at the press conference, 9 days ago, the question was, okay, what direction is Fred going to go in with this? How is he going to try and attack this hire? We really don't know what went on behind the scenes. There's been a lot of rumors about, maybe going after coaches with, much larger national profiles. And who knows whether that actually happened or not. But whether that was the case and this was plan B, or whether Archie Miller ended up becoming plan A just through the natural process, I think it's an excellent hire. So many positives with this gentleman. He's 38 years old. He has had 6 years at Dayton, which is not a small school by any means. It's certainly, I think, bigger than a mid-major. He's gotten them in the tournament the last 4 years. His teams have shown a lot of promise on both offense and defense. He has assistant head coaching experience in the Big Ten. He was an assistant coach at Ohio State from 2007 to 2009. He was an assistant under his brother at Arizona for 2 years. So he's a well-traveled coach. He's 5-4 already in the NCAA tournament. He's been to an Elite Eight. I think from the standpoint of, if you're looking at potential coaches out there, guys that people in coaching circles have looked at and said, this person could very well be special moving forward. Certainly, as Zach Osterman said in a tweet, there's not many coaches under the age of 40 that have as much upside and have already shown as much as coaches as Archie Miller has so far.
Yeah. Is my microphone better now? I know it was a little bit echoey at first. Okay, good. Yeah. We put this together real quick, so it didn't quite get all the I's or T's crossed and I's dotted.
I know how much you hate not having the right microphone setting, so I wanted to.
It's the worst. It's the worst. So, it's interesting because I had, a couple of conversations with folks this morning, and when I woke up, my thought was, okay, I feel like now that, we know that Alford's not going to be the guy, we kind of found that out last night. And, so all the guys that Indiana was kind of rumored to be talking about other than Chris Mack aren't coaching anymore. I figured we would either find out something in the next 24 to maybe 48, 72 hours, or you start really thinking, okay, maybe, there's legs to this Donovan thing and they're waiting that out. So I kind of figured it would go one of those two ways. And this, I wasn't quite expecting it to be this soon. But it certainly makes sense based on kind of how everything has gone, how this process has played out. And I'm with you. I mean, I think I had Archie Miller down in like the number 5, 6 range, when we did our list, obviously with, Donovan and Bennett and his brother Sean Miller. And then I think, from there, I thought those guys were kind of clearly ahead. And then I didn't, it was hard to separate, the Chris Collinses and the Chris Macks and Archie Millers really from each other. Do you, as you look at that, is there something about him that puts him clearly above those guys? Or do you think that he was just, kind of similar to all those other guys that were being rumored that might be the coach?
I don't know. I mean, it's hard to say what's going into the evaluatory process. Let me, what might actually help us out here. Fred Glass did have a statement that was released in the email that IU just sent out announcing the hire. I'm going to go ahead and just read it.
Let's read that.
Go off of that. While there was great interest in this position, Archie Miller was on my short list from the very beginning, said Fred Glass. The more I learned about him, the more convinced I became that he is the coach we need to meet our high expectations for many years to come. First, he has the commitments to compliance, wellness, and academics that we require at Indiana. A coach's son with the headiness and toughness to flourish as a 5'9" major college point guard. Archie is a proven leader, proven winner, proven recruiter, and a proven player developer with a defense-first mentality that will help us win championships. Perhaps most importantly, he understands and embraces the special stature of Indiana University basketball and the critical relationship it must have with its former players, Indiana high school players and programs, and the entire state of Indiana. So if I'm going to parse off of that, first of all, it's a very nice, valediction of Archie and the hire. I have to think that Archie Miller's involvement in recruiting in the state of Indiana probably plays a role in this. I have to think that his familiarity with the region as a whole, the fact that he's done it for 6 years as a head coach at a program that is, a pretty basketball first sort of program. I mean, Dayton certainly isn't in Indiana, but that's what Dayton is. I mean, Dayton University is kind of their basketball program first, and then that's their calling card. Trying to parse them out from, I mean, certainly. I imagine IU probably looked at some of those upper echelon figures. If we talked about Billy Donovan, we talked about Tony Bennett, we talked about Sean Miller. I think it's plausible that, if they talked to any of those people and offered them the position, they might have just said, I'm flattered, but this isn't where I want to go with my career. We probably won't know any of those details. But honestly, it's interesting when we first started discussing the possibility of Tom Crean no longer being the coach at IU, Archie Miller was always one of the first names that came up. He was always one of those names where you were like, that guy we think is ready to step up to this level. His name had gotten dropped somewhat because there was this argument that he was going to wait for his dream job, which was supposedly the Ohio State job. And so because we believed that, I think many of us kind of took him out of the running or moved him further down.
That concerned me a little bit as we started parsing these, and
right.
And I guess in hindsight now it kind of seems a little bit ridiculous, but is that at all? I mean, do we wonder if that's his dream job? And
I mean, I'll be honest with you. It's hard for has Archie Miller ever said that that's his dream job? I don't think I've ever read him saying it. I mean, it's media members, many of whom were claiming that Steve Alford was a no-brainer going to get the job, like complete shoe-in, as recently as 24 hours ago. So it's who knows what to believe. I'm not concerned about it at all. And I think if you're going to look at, at Archie Miller versus other people who were in that category of coach, which included like Chris Holtman, which included Chris Collins, which included Chris Mack. I mean, I think you could argue that Archie's had more consistency and perhaps more appreciable success having been to an Elite Eight than some of the other guys have, either because of, they haven't been there as long or they haven't done it for as long.
Yeah. And, just kind of looking at the numbers here, obviously Dayton, they went 24-8 this year, 15-3 in the conference, but they did win their conference this year. That makes it the second year in a row that they've won the conference title. Last year, they tied for first. This year, it was an outright title. And the year before that, they were second. And then in the 3 seasons that he was a head coach at Dayton prior to that, they finished 5th, 11th, and tied for 5th. And that 2013-14 season where they tied for 5th, they finished 26-11, and that's the year they made the run to the Elite Eight. And they've now made the NCAA tournament 4 years in a row, an Elite Eight appearance, a round of 32 appearance. The last 2 years they have lost in the round of 64. But it should also be noted they have been a victim, I think, even of an objective viewpoint of kind of maybe being underseeded and then having some really tough matchups in their NCAA tournament, appearances. So I wouldn't. You can't just look at that and say like, oh, they've choked in the first round of the tournament. I mean, they lost those games obviously, but they also had some pretty tough matchups there.
I mean, this year they get a first round draw against a Wichita State team that, if you go by KenPom, probably should have been a 3 seed or a 4 seed, and they get them in the first round, and they played them tooth and nail. I mean, like, as well as Kentucky played against Wichita State, I think you can make an argument Dayton played almost as good, if not better, against Wichita State. The previous year, they get drawn against a Syracuse team that, goes to the Final Four in the first round of the tournament. I mean, look, that it's there's certainly been, I think, some underseeding. You have to like what they did the previous 2 years, getting to getting to the Elite Eight in 2014. They beat Ohio State, Syracuse, and Stanford along the way. And look, even bringing it back to a more basic level, it's hard to have sustained success in the tournament when you're not at a school that's in a big conference. I mean, the A10 is, at that particular talent level, that's a tough conference. And you consider that, what he was able to do in that NCAA tournament when they went to the Elite Eight. I don't think they had a player on their roster that was above like 6'6" or 6'7", and they somehow still managed to make a run all the way there. I mean, this is a guy who's really shown a lot of promise with a limited resource set, and I'm, for one, quite excited to see what he'll be able to do with the full toolbox.
Oh, no question about it. So I totally neglected to mention our Hoosier Proud banner moment at the beginning of this episode. I think it should be quite easy. The hiring of Archie Miller, which, hey, we've got a coach. There's a lot of upside with this coach. We can now look forward to hanging that 6th banner, which is always, always our goal. One thing that I want to do, Galen, is I want to, for folks like me, I mean, I haven't watched much Dayton basketball. I don't think I've ever watched a minute of Dayton basketball outside of, play in the NCAA tournament. So I'd like to go through and let's just kind of go through, and we can look on KenPom and kind of go through his statistical profile. And let's kind of identify what are the hallmarks of an Archie Miller team. What can Indiana fans expect? We'll do that here in a moment. I do real quick want to take a quick minute and tell you about our sponsor, SeatGeek. Buying tickets online for sports and concerts, like tickets for IU basketball games next year, which now seem extraordinarily exciting to have, has been a confusing process for a long time. It's always been hard to find the best deal for that game or show you want to go to, and none of those older ticket sites want to change that, but SeatGeek is different. They've come along and created an amazing app and website that makes it easier than ever for fans to buy and sell tickets. SeatGeek is the first place I go to look for tickets to a game or concert because everything about SeatGeek is designed to make life easier for sports and music fans. They actually do the price comparison for you on SeatGeek by searching multiple ticket sites, and that ensures that you get the best possible deal. So they do the work, you save the time and money. Best of all, our listeners get a $20 rebate off of their first SeatGeek purchase. So to get your $20 rebate, download the SeatGeek app, go to the settings tab and click add a promo code and enter the promo code assembly, ASSEMBLY, and SeatGeek will send you $20 after you've made your first ticket purchase. Download the SeatGeek app and enter the promo code assembly today. All right, so and by the way, the terms of the contract, we should mention that too. It's 7 years and roughly in the neighborhood of $4 million a year, right?
That's what I saw? That is what the Vertical is reporting right now, yes.
Okay. Which, monetarily, that seems pretty reasonable. Crean was making, what, 3.1, I think? Or somewhere in the...
I think it was like 3.3. Yeah, I mean, but it's about what I would have expected. I mean, if you look at the list, certainly, Krzyzewski and Calipari are making more than everybody else. And then you get down below that. According to the last graph I saw, which was 2016, so last year, Sean Miller was making 4.5 a year, and Bill Self was making 4.7. So if this is the case, it would put him as the 5th highest paid coach in college basketball.
Very nice. Okay. So I've got the KenPom page open for Archie Miller, and let's go through here. And maybe before we dig into the numbers, do you have more experience perhaps than I do actually watching Dayton play to maybe just give a snapshot of what an Archie Miller team looks like in general?
Well, I mean, I've got some experience watching them. I mean, I'm not sitting there watching a tremendous number of A10 games, but I mean, what I've always been impressed by, and I don't even know if this necessarily shines through in an individual statistical category, but I've really always been impressed with the intensity with which his teams play. To me, that's always been kind of the hallmark of how he's played. They've they do have a tendency, I think, on offense to play a little bit fast and then to try to slow their opponents down on defense. If you look just, for instance, at the last couple of years, they've averaged about 16 seconds of possession on offense, so they're not afraid to kind of push it a little bit. Defensively, their opponents are taking about 18 and a half seconds. Which is actually one of the longer possession times in college basketball. So they really do try to use defensive pressure to extend the opponent's possessions while taking advantage of things offensively themselves. They've they've never really, at least in the times that I've watched them and looking back at the rosters that he's had, it's been very rare for them to have much height. I mean, like you go back and you look at the 2014 team I already mentioned. I mean, they only had 2 players on that roster above 6'6", and that, even in this past year, I think they had a guy that was 6'9". They had a guy that was 6'7". I don't think that that's a choice. I think that's more of a reality of the recruiting scene. But no, I've always, like I said, I've been impressed with their intensity, and I've been impressed with the fact that they play a lot of pretty close games. I mean, looking back at the games that they played this year, they only had 1 game where they lost where I think the margin was greater than 6. So, and you look at the games that they lost this year. I mean, they lost to St. Mary's at home. There's no real crime in that. They lost to Nebraska on a neutral floor. They lost to Northwestern in Chicago. They lost to VCU on the road. Not an easy place to play. So like they tend to take care of business, and so it's interesting. They don't rebound the ball particularly well on the offensive glass, but the rest of what they do offensively seems to compensate for that.
Yeah, and one thing obviously Indiana fans are going to want to look at after this year is, do they turn the ball over a lot? And for this year they had a turnover percentage of 16.9%, which sounds impossible. Like, how could a team actually have a turnover percentage that low in a game, right? Amazing. That was 62nd in the country. In 2016 they were actually 219th at 18.6%, and then 96th in 2015. One thing, going through here, especially the last 4 years, looking at their non-conference strength of schedule, because that's been another question for Indiana, obviously the poor non-conference scheduling. And it's not really an apples to apples comparison for a Dayton to an Indiana, because Dayton really has to go out. And I mean, it's imperative that they schedule better teams in the non-conference schedule to improve their NCAA tournament chances, whereas Indiana doesn't, quote unquote, have to do that. Although we've talked about it ad nauseum, they should. But this year, Dayton's non-conference strength of schedule was 74th in the country. Last year, it was 23rd. The year before that, it was 71st. So clearly, Archie and Dayton understanding the realities of trying to get an NCAA tournament berth at a smaller conference and not being afraid to go challenge his team, which you like to see. So we will see if that translates, to Indiana, and he's obviously only going to have so much control over that for this upcoming season. But you at least like to see that in his history, that he's not just trying to pad the win total. They're going out there and playing, a pretty solid non-conference schedule, and that would be a breath of fresh air given what we've seen at IU recently.
You look at who they played this year, and as you mentioned, it's not apples to apples. But even in the weakest games they played this year, they played VMI and Portland and Austin Peay. But they also played Alabama, St. Mary's. They were in a tournament where they ended up playing Nebraska and New Mexico, both of whom were top 150 teams. They played East Tennessee State, who was a very good mid-major this year. They played Northwestern. They played Vanderbilt. In previous years, they've played against Iowa in the tournament. I think they were in Atlantis a couple of years ago. So they had Iowa and they had Xavier. They actually won a couple of those games. They beat Monmouth. They beat Vanderbilt on the road last year. They played Arkansas in a non-conference game. I mean, this is what we've been talking about. It's like you're not going out and scheduling Kansas and Duke as your non-conference teams, but you're scheduling top 100 teams that are going to help your power rating and help your team get better. And it seems like this is a guy that understands, or believes at least, that's a route to getting a better basketball team.
And help you identify weaknesses, more importantly than anything. Yeah. I mean, imagine if there had been more teams like Fort Wayne in the non-conference schedule. I mean, that Fort Wayne identified some major weaknesses for this team. Maybe you can address them earlier than... Anyway, that definitely is an argument for another day. We don't need to dive into that right now. Let me ask you this, just to play devil's advocate here, because we are basking in the afterglow of Indiana announcing their new coach, to a certain extent, unless it was just totally off the radar and, someone who's had horrible success. I think we were all going to be excited just because so much has built up over the past week or so. Right. But the reality is this: the name wasn't Billy Donovan, the name wasn't Tony Bennett, the name wasn't Sean Miller. And I think most people, when they had him ranked, had those guys, kind of clearly above, and then maybe Archie Miller in that next group, as we mentioned. So is there any cause for disappointment that Indiana wasn't able to get one of those top guys? Again, there's a lot of enthusiasm and there's a ton of reason to be excited about Archie Miller. But should we at all have a twinge of, kind of wish Indiana had been able to get a guy a little bit higher on the list? Do you feel any of that? Do you think IU fans should feel any of that?
No. I mean, look, I look at it like this. Prior to the coaching search getting going, I wrote an article talking about where coaches come from and where good coaches come from. And this idea that if you're an IU, that you have to hire a top coach who's got an impeccable resume already in order to guarantee success, I don't believe in that. I don't think that that's what we've seen from a lot of major programs. Certainly programs that have become major over the course of the last 20 years or so. They've gone out and they've hired a coach that's promising, has shown some degree of promise leading into their big shot at a top level job. It's no sure thing that someone like a Tony Bennett or a Sean Miller is going to have the sort of success that they would have here. And while they've had success at a higher level than an Archie Miller has, you could also look at where those guys came from. Sean Miller was the coach at Xavier and did a good job at Xavier. Xavier's a better program than Dayton. Was able to get slightly higher seeds, but didn't accomplish any more at Xavier than Archie Miller has at Dayton. Tony Bennett had a nice run for 3 years at Washington State and then got hired to take over a Virginia program that was kind of in the middle of nowhere as far as basketball was concerned. And so, if we're looking at those guys and we're saying, well, there were smart people in their athletic departments who looked at those coaches before they were what they became and said their abilities and their acumen as basketball coaches is going to help to take our program where it needs to go. I don't see why that same logic can't apply to this Archie Miller hire. To me, the idea, I honestly think we'll never know for sure because they'll never say anything. But I honestly think that, overtures were made to at least one of those coaches, maybe two of them in that top three that we were mentioning. And who knows what the reasoning was why that didn't work out. I don't think that there's any need to be disappointed if that was the case, that it didn't work out. And I look at this and I say, part of being a good, top level basketball program and a top level athletic department is analysis and trying to figure out, does this person have what it takes to win at this level? And it's not always the best thing in the world to just go try to find the guy who's already doing it. A lot of times it's what you need to do to go out and find the guy who, is about ready to do it, because that's where the energy is going to come from. The guy who's got his first crack, who's already shown a lot of potential, a lot of promise, being able to come into a program like Indiana and take it and infuse that energy into what the program is doing. So I think a lot of people took parts of what Fred Glass said literally and just disregarded other parts of it and are now saying, well, Fred really overpromised and underdelivered with this hire. I'm seeing that already on some of the message boards and on Twitter. And I just don't, to me, I'm sorry if you're looking at it that way. I think that's a kind of a defeatist way of looking at it, but we'll see. We'll see.
Tweet from Rick Bozich, talked to two coaches about hiring of Archie Miller. First said terrific. Second said best all-around pick. Dana O'Neill tweeted what Indiana will like most about Archie Miller: no pretense. He's basketball through and through. Here's the statement from Archie Miller. This was tweeted out. He said, excited to be a Hoosier. I am honored to be the head coach at Indiana University, said Miller. IU is one of the greatest basketball programs and academic institutions in the country, and I cannot wait to get started. With peerless fan support, outstanding facilities and tradition, a beautiful campus, and located in one of the most fertile recruiting areas in the country, IU is a dream destination for me and my family. I cannot wait to connect with former players, current players, and future players, and all of Hoosier Nation. I want to thank all of the great people and players at the University of Dayton who have supported me along the way. I look forward to outlining my vision for IU basketball and offering my sincerest appreciation for the great people at Dayton on Monday. And at the end of the day, it's Indiana. It's Indiana, the absolute pinnacle of, no, I'm just kidding. He didn't end his statement.
Don't do that. Don't. I don't need any PTSD this morning, Jared. Okay.
No, he take off that last part. But I mean, that's a great statement. Seems perfectly manicured to fit into everything that Fred Glass kind of laid out in his in his press conference. And that's what you want. I think at the end of the day, as fans, we want someone who values the opportunity of being at Indiana, and words in a press conference and words in a statement are cheap. Obviously, you really back that up with action over a number of years, and that will be shown. But again, a guy who's young that has the potential to grow into the job and kind of go to the next level as he takes the Indiana program to the next level, and a guy who's young enough to be at Indiana for 25, 30 years and really build a long legacy there. I do, agree with what you said earlier, that he seems to offer perhaps the best combination of all the candidates of youth, still kind of enough of a blank slate in terms of we haven't seen him in a big conference yet. It's like Tony Bennett. We saw him at Virginia. We kind of saw what they did. So maybe he's a little bit more of a known quantity, and they won a lot there, but there were obviously some questions about how well he would fit at Indiana, and they're going to be questions about anybody until we see them actually coach at Indiana. But I do agree, and that's one of the reasons I was always intrigued by Archie, and in hindsight, perhaps I overrated the Ohio State as his dream job thing, but that did kind of scare me a little bit, only because I don't want Indiana to ever be a stepping stone job for anybody. But I think if you operate from a position of strength, which is what we should do as Indiana University basketball, there isn't a better job in the Big Ten. So if a guy gets there, if we can't convince him to stay and coach basketball at Indiana as opposed to Ohio State, then maybe we're doing something wrong.
Look, I look at it like this. You know what Thad Matta's dream job always was?
Indiana, right?
Indiana. And he's still at Ohio State, and he took Ohio State to, a couple of Final Fours, and has done some great recruiting there. And certainly he's having some problem now. But this idea that, my dream job is X, and therefore, I'm going to leave for that, or I shouldn't be considered for this other job. I don't know. To me, I'm not worried about any of that. And I think if you're a guy that is, once you get to the big time, you're going to take the most advantage of what you've got. And you're going to, the chances of Archie Miller, getting here and, really making this job his own are as good as anybody's, and so I don't see any problem with this whatsoever. I really don't.
There was a statement. I just lost it on my phone. Okay, so here's a statement. This is actually from, I believe, the AD at Dayton. I want to extend our deepest gratitude and sincere thanks to Archie for an incredible run. He is a first-class person and coach and has made incredible contributions to our men's basketball program, the university, and the community. He has made a lasting impact on the student athletes he has served. University of Dayton president Eric Spina added, although the university is saddened by Archie's departure, we are grateful for his tenacity and the support he provided our student athletes on and off the court. We appreciate Archie's contributions in strengthening our program and returning it to national visibility, and we wish Archie and Morgan well. I'm assuming Morgan is his wife. Yes. This is a great basketball program in a great basketball town, and we will hire a great coach to build on that tradition. And certainly, we hope Dayton does that. One thing that's always interesting for me when a coach is hired away is seeing the reaction of the fan base and of, kind of the powers that be at that school. Are they happy to see him go? What are some of the things that they're saying? Because, actually, in hindsight, if you go back and look at some of the reaction of Marquette fans when Tom Crean left, it's interesting how much of, and not all of it, of course, but how much of what they said kind of came to fruition over the 9 years. And they had obviously a long sample size with him at Marquette. And certainly a young coach can grow and become better and do new things with additional resources and what Archie will have going from Dayton to Indiana. But, at the end of the day, he's a person. There are certain things about him and his coaching style that will stay the same, and what he does in game and all of those things. And that's, one thing I said to myself I wanted to do once the hire was made is really kind of go back and dig in. And what are some of the fans saying about him? What gets written about him as he leaves from Dayton fans? Is it similar to what IU fans were saying about Tom Crean, where it's like it's time to move on and this, that, or the other thing was kind of a problem for many years? Or are they devastated that this amazing coach that they had in their grasp is now leaving. My guess is it's going to shade more toward the latter than the former. I have no idea without getting in there and looking. Do you have any sense?
I'm looking at udpride.com right now, Jared. I am on the ball with this reporting. So, there's a lot of concerns about the recruiting class, which apparently is really good that they've got coming in. Had to know
concerns that he might try and take some of those guys to Indiana.
Well, or maybe just concerns that they might decommit and look elsewhere. He
does have some scholarships to work with. I mean,
he does. Well, or does he?
Well,
right now he does not actually. And James Blackman Jr. just tweeted the emoji eyes. So I don't know what that means, but comments. Disappointment. It's almost all disappointment. After what he did for us, I wish him well. Can't hate on Archie leaving. Did great things for our program. Thanks for the hard work and for taking UD to the next level, Coach. Good luck at IU. Thank you, Archie. We love you and good luck. It's about as uniformly positive as I can find. This is one of those situations where I'm not surprised but still disappointed. So no, there's not a don't let the door hit you in the ass on the way out sort of vibe that I'm getting at all. That's one message thread on one message board. So who can say what the larger thing is? But if as a small sample size, I think they missed the guy already.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's good. That's what you want for a coach that's coming into your program.
We did have a comment. Jay Horry just commented, it's going to be nice to be a pleasant change to have an IU coach that's welcome in Indiana high school gyms.
Do we know a lot has been made about a guy's ability to recruit Indiana, and I know people talked up Chris Mack not just because of his coaching acumen, but because he pulled Trevon Blewett out of Indiana and Steve Alford had recruited the state. Do we have any experience of Archie Miller recruiting the state, and do you think that's overblown at all?
No, I don't think it's overblown. I think there was definitely a split that had occurred between Crean and Indiana high school coaches and AAU coaches.
And let me clarify. I think recruiting the state is important, but do you think a coach's previous demonstrated ability to come pull recruits out of Indiana makes a difference? Or if he's a good recruiter and cares about it, he can rebuild some of those relationships in Indiana? Or did he need some of that coming in?
I think, it helps to have a little bit of it coming in, and I think he's got that. You can't coach at Dayton and have coached, as an assistant at Ohio State and not be known for recruiting that area. And as Jay just pointed out, Archie's been successful recruiting Chicago and Cincinnati in the past. He's well known in the Midwest by AAU coaches and high school coaches. So from a regional perspective, I think that's helpful. And it's something I think that people need to keep in mind. I want to see Indiana kids at IU. I want to see us going hard after Indiana kids, but keep in mind that, Bob Knight's best teams tended to rely on kids from not just Indiana, but also from Ohio and from Illinois. So it's not just, to me, it's not just a state thing, it's a region thing. And the idea of being able to stay at home and keep those sorts of high school players in the mix.
Yeah. So what other angles of this do we need to cover? I've never hosted a show after a coaching, a new coach. We've done the show now this will be our 7th year coming up. And all of those seasons have been with Tom Crean, which is kind of amazing. It's such uncharted territory to be now looking at an Indiana program under a guy like Archie Miller. So, and maybe the next thing to look at is, okay, we've got the coach. So what's next? Obviously, there are decisions to be made by James Blackman Jr., Thomas Bryant. OG reports have indicated that he's leaning toward going pro, but does this change that? Who knows about that? Even a guy like Colin Hartman could come back and play if he wants to. And then the recruits. Justin Smith signed a letter of intent. I don't believe he is asked out of that yet. Al Durham and Clifton Moore both have. You would certainly think, especially a guy like Clifton Moore, who's 6'10" and can shoot, and for a coach that hasn't had a lot of size, you would think that a guy like Clifton Moore, he'd probably want to try and keep around. Other than all of the family obligations and just kind of the whirlwind that it's going to be for Archie Miller in his personal life, are those the next steps for him, is to, kind of reach out to the current players, the committed recruits, and then maybe even to the recruits that he had committed to Dayton and start assembling his roster for next year?
Yeah, I think that's the first order of business. It's interesting because this is great timing for IU because you're going to have a a player in place a coach in place who will now have a few days to get ready before going to the Final Four, which is where all the coaches are. I've talked with, some AAU coaches about how this process works. And, you really want to have a head coach in place by that point, because that's where they're building their staff. That's where they're networking with people. That's where they're kind of figuring out what their strategic plan is going to be moving forward. And now what we look at is a coach that we know is going to be in place for the live recruiting period, which I think starts the week after the Final Four. The roster decisions are going to be fascinating, because it is certainly about what James and Thomas Bryant and OG want to do, but it'll also be interesting to see what Archie Miller wants to do with the roster coming in. There's players that are that he's recruited, certainly, that we want to take a look at. There's probably certain players on the roster that he may look at and be like, well, that they don't necessarily fit into what I'm planning on doing long term. There's a lot that we don't know about yet, and I think that we're going to have the press conference on Monday. We're going to have a period of kind of, I guess, maybe an aura around the program where it's like, ooh, what are the possibilities? And then as we get into April, I think that's where we're going to see roster stuff happening. We're going to see the finalization of the recruiting class, and then we're going to have to just settle in and not really know a whole lot. That's kind of the weird thing. Like, even in the Tom Crean years where things hadn't gone well, we had a pretty good sense by like early to mid-April of what trajectory things were going to go. Right now, everything's up in the air. I mean, we don't know who's going to be on Archie Miller's staff. We don't know like what their targets are going to be for this year or for next year. So much up in the air. It's almost overwhelming just trying to think about the different permutations and what might happen.
Boy, it is, but it's fun and it's exciting and it's new. And I think more than anything, that's really what Indiana needed, and to a certain extent, that's gotten lost some in the narrative about Tom Crean and why he was fired and the unfairness of IU fans and all the weird storylines and somewhat inaccurate storylines that have gone on around that. But to a certain extent, I think everybody needed something new and fresh, because there was no longer any hope. Like, it felt like the ceiling had been reached with Tom Crean. It didn't seem like there was a lot of additional light at the end of the tunnel beyond the good times that we had already experienced. And now the Archie Miller era at Indiana is a blank slate. And there's enough in his, certainly in his resume, to suggest that greater things are on the horizon. You're certainly encouraged by all the things that you hear people say about him. And again, that, comments like those are a dime a dozen and not worth anything. All that matters is what is actually done on the court. But it really does seem like a time of great potential and a time of great hope, where all things once again seem possible with Indiana basketball. And that's a nice place to be in after really for a few years. And, for some folks, perhaps even more, not feeling that and feeling like, the program had a bit of a ceiling on it, given the leadership. And this seems to open that back up again. And it's a nice place to be.
There's always going to be, and someone pointed this out on my feed. Everybody thought Tom Crean was the right hire when he was first hired, and that's true. And look, you don't ever know how things are going to go, how things are going to end up. But what I do know is this: given the way that Archie Miller is considered within the coaching fraternity, given the way that he's considered within the media fraternity, it's definitely a very positive feeling, a very good potential feeling that you have with Miller as the coach. I mean, and again, I think from the standpoint of how we judge the hire, we're not going to know for a few years, but we don't need to judge the hire right now. We can simply look at what's gone on with IU basketball over the last few years and say, well, this is an area we don't necessarily want to be in, and let the guy kind of do his job and see where it takes us. Yeah. I'm excited about it. I really am.
I am too. And I think, I'm sure, and again, they're going to be like, someone just tweeted me and said totally underwhelming. I don't think they're outside of Billy Donovan. Again, I don't think there was a name that everybody was just going to think was a grand slam hire. I even had someone tweet me yesterday, like, why do we want Donovan? Which was, a ridiculous
Wow.
statement, which just shows you that some people, aren't thinking clearly.
There's a lot, and that's the thing. I mean, and this was you're never gonna have, or rarely, I guess. Rarely are you going to have just a hire that everybody jumps on immediately. Some people have decided to look into this coaching search, and they decided that Fred Glass was going to have to hire, the best coach in America, or it was going to be a failed search and it was going to demonstrate, whatever agenda they were driving. Or, you could look at it and say, okay, this is a dynamic sort of thing. I mean, there's a lot of things that go into it. And so rather than go in almost hoping to be disappointed, I'm going to go into it and say, all right, let's give this some time. Let's take a look at it. I don't know. I mean, 24 hours ago, a large portion of the fan base was freaking out that Steve Alford was going to be the hire. And now we got people complaining that Archie Miller is underwhelming. Look,
very few. I've only seen one person issue a complaint, I should say. So
there's been a few that have tweeted us at Crimson Cast, and they've, there have been some disappointment, but for the most part, people really like the hire. People that I know follow basketball closely and understand how these things work. I think this was a guy that was in vogue for a lot of jobs, and I really like the combination of youth and already existent output. There's going to be some people that don't think that that's enough, and that's fine. But I have a hard time envisioning anybody looking at this hire and saying, well, I'm just not going to follow IU basketball anymore, which I did hear with some other candids that were being floated around.
With the status quo or with some of those candidates. Yeah. So, I mean, this certainly gets you past that. Wow, what a day. It's interesting. I think I just was texting with Andy and Ryan. I think we're going to try and do a show next week, maybe Monday or Tuesday, and break this down even more. It's still in that whirlwind phase. And frankly, Archie Miller is one of the candidates that I didn't dig as much into as some of the other ones. And I'm excited to go. I know Evan Daniels did a podcast with him recently, which will be a good listen. And that's really, if you're an IU fan and kind of, you have all this energy and you're enthusiastic and it's like, what do I do next? Dig in and learn about your new coach. Listen to podcasts that he's done. Go back and read, old articles. Watch, some old press conferences. I mean, we've talked so much about how, even, this past season, hearing excuses about injuries and some of the things that we heard, we would have liked to hear differently. We'll see how Archie Miller, approaches those kind of moments and those kind of opportunities. Because obviously the greatest predictor of what you're going to do in the future is what you've done in the past. And so it's kind of a fun time now to go, it's like Christmas morning. Now we get to go open our Christmas present and play with it and see, and kind of see what it's like. And it's a fun time. So, wow, what a day to be a Hoosier fan. Any other angles that we should take with this? Any final thoughts before we sign off and go start digging into this hire?
I'm going to throw a couple things out, and this is all courtesy of Jay Horry, who's been messaging me throughout. So you all know Giannis Antetokounmpo, who's the Greek freak, plays for the Milwaukee Bucks. His, I believe, younger brother is redshirting at Dayton right now. So that might be something that we could see in the future. We'll have to see what it was with that. I mean, he's recruited other top level players. He recruited Courtney Lee to Western Kentucky. And also,
has he put anybody in the NBA from Dayton?
I couldn't tell you off the top of my head. To be honest,
I don't know either.
But he is involved as an assistant coach with Team USA. And if you want to talk about something that is important from a recruiting perspective, having that extra contact with players that are in the pipeline.
Coach K has shown that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And, that's something that's hard to oversell, like how big those connections can be from a recruiting perspective. So look, I really think that we lassoed someone that's a live wire, as they would say. This is a guy that he's shown a lot of coaching acumen. He's shown a lot of recruiting acumen, and he's an assistant coach for the U19 USA team. He replaced Billy Donovan, ironically enough, in that position. So, look, I think there's a lot of upside. I think there'll be some initial disappointment from people who had been led to think that they were going to get a bigger name. But I think as people start to dig in, as people start to kind of see what he does, I think he's going to be making a lot of people very happy. And I'm looking forward to seeing it unfold.
I agree. And now no one cares whether Billy Donovan was in town yesterday because it doesn't matter anymore.
Right.
It does not matter. All right. Well, As I said, Galen, thanks for hopping on last minute. I mean, this was, literally we saw the news and decided 5 minutes later, let's try and do a quick show, give some instant reaction. So really excited that we did. Glad so many of you decided to join us live. And thank you if you listened on the podcast as well. We will obviously have a lot more coverage and a lot more content coming up. I'll try and round up Andy and Ryan and get a show with the usual gang as soon as possible. Who knows? That could be tomorrow. It could be Monday. We'll see when that will happen. We'll obviously have the radio show coming up next week. And obviously, you should be subscribed to Crimson Cast if you aren't already. We've been telling you about all the great shows that they've had recently. Are you guys have anything? I mean, obviously, you and Scott, I assume, will be breaking this down pretty soon.
Yeah, I think Scott and I are probably going to take 24 hours to digest it, and we'll have a show up tomorrow at some point where we talk about it. And I'm
so used to not taking 24 hours to digest anything. It's like instant. That's how we do it on the show.
We may not get to wait that long. I'm already getting pressure from Jason Kennedy and a couple of other people about podcasting about this now. So we'll work on it. I'll see what I can put together.
Do it. Well, awesome. Well, hey,
thanks for having me.
Oh, for sure. Always glad that you come. If you haven't yet, make sure that you subscribe to our email list. Go to assemblycall.com/join. You can either start your free membership or subscribe to the newsletter. I sent an email out to everybody right before this went live, so you'll get alerts of live shows when we do it. You'll get our 6-banner Saturday news roundup, which was relevant. Today's was relevant for all of about 5 hours because I think the headline was answers sparse as speculation runs rampant. Well, now we have the answers. I just had to go cancel the scheduled auto tweets because no one wants to read a news roundup that doesn't talk about this yet. So, but what a fun time. What an exciting time to be an Indiana fan. Archie Miller is the new coach at Indiana. And now it's time for us all to dig in and learn more about Archie. So let's go do that. And we will talk to you on the next episode of the Assembly Call. Take care.